Alright, how you doing guys? This is lesson 4 on creating dominant lines in jazz. So what I want to talk about today is the concept of playing over the 5 chord or back cycling. So this is something that up until now we've looked at playing over a static dominant chord, which is incredibly useful and is the kind of thing that will get you out of a lot of jams. If you're playing in, say, Superstition, the Stevie Wonder tune, it's essentially just an E7 chord the whole time. But one of the things that jazz musicians find frustrating at times is the lack of harmonic movement in a chord progression, I should say. So that's why if you ever look at a jazz blues, there are many more chords in it than, say, a country blues or a blues. And they find that, say, 4 bars on one chord, like the standard first 4 bars of a regular blues, is just not satisfactory. It gets kind of boring. However, if you find yourself in that context, there are ways of creating the illusion of movement when there actually isn't any movement. And the first way to do this is to play lines derived from the 5 chord. So if we just take a little quick trip to theory land, it'll be brief. The strongest relationship in Western music, Western tonal music, is between the 1 and the 5. So that's how you get the... Sounds like if you've ever heard the end of, say, a Beethoven symphony or that, there's a, that sort of sound. The 5 wants to go back to the 1. And you can play around with that a lot because essentially music is just about tension and release, and a masterful improviser knows how to control the tension, build it up to a point where it wants to resolve, and then they may choose to or may choose not to resolve it. I mean, Wagner built a career on building tension, and after maybe 18 hours, 4 operas, he'll resolve the tension. But if we're in the key of A, which we have been up until now, the 5 chord is going to be E. So that means working out what the notes in E7 are going to be, and then those notes will lead perfectly back to an A. So previously we've looked at playing enclosures, we've looked at just learning the notes of an A arpeggio, finding different arpeggios within the A position. We had B minor, E minor, G major 7, so forth. Chromatic passing notes. You can get a lot of mileage out of all of those things. But once you start to get into the land of playing over the 5, playing 2 5s or back cycling, then to a lot of people, to the layperson, it's going to sound like you're playing relatively complex changes, but in reality you're just playing over an A. So the notes that would be in an E7 chord would be E, G sharp would be the 3rd, B is going to be the 5th, and then we have a D, which is going to be the 7th. And then you can add 9ths, but we'll get into that because there's a thing that a lot of people tend to do to their 5 chords, which is make them altered chords. So having said that, if I was playing just one of the licks we had before, something similar to... I could then venture to the 5 chord. So that was an E7 or an E9 lick. I went to the G sharp, which doesn't belong in A. It's a major 7th. But in E, it's the 3rd. So we get this. That's a cool lick. It can sound a little bit classical and bland if you just play pure E7 licks. So this brings me into the next topic, which is turning a chord into an altered chord or a flat 9 chord. Now flat 9 is really the sort of bebop sound. So you might recall in the first video I mentioned that there are 3 chord families. You've got major chords, minor chords, and dominant 7th chords. And under the dominant 7th chord family, we have diminished are included, and so are augmented. And I remember when I first heard that when I was younger, I found it hard to understand. Diminished is a minor, it's built on stacked minor thirds, and which is true, it is a minor chord, or sort of a derivative of a minor chord. But in the context of jazz, if you look at the notes in a 7 flat 9 chord, they are the same as a diminished chord. So an E7 flat 9, E, G, B, D, and then F is just a diminished chord. And so rather than thinking about diminished harmony, just think about a 7th chord with a flat 9. Simple as that. So now that lick that I played before that went 3, 5, 7 up to a regular 9 would sound like this. Very Charlie Parker. So it just instantly takes you to 52nd Street in the 40s. Then you can do all these little turns that Bill would do. That kind of thing. And you can build these lines off any chord tone in the 5 chord. So I could do it off the tonic, I could do it off the 7th. There are a lot of different licks that you can get. I will do a video on altered dominant chords because I'm aware that I haven't actually talked about it, but I just wanted to introduce this concept so that you could go and practice playing E licks over an A, because it's a big mental leap to essentially solo over a chord that isn't being played, to superimpose a chord that you're hearing in your head to create tension. I'll just give you an example. I'll give you a couple of bars of me going between the 1 and the 5, and I will use altered and flat 9 chords, and you should be able to pick them. They will really pop out, but you'll get that great resolution. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I was just going between E7 and A, but thinking fundamentally in the key of A, or an A7 chord. And I wouldn't necessarily do a lot of those things if the chords were moving quickly. So if I was playing over a standard, like a rhythm changes, for example, where the chords move relatively quickly, I may not choose to do that because I'm already getting that harmonic movement that here I'm trying to create. But if I was playing over like a blues where it's like 4 bars of chord 1, 2 bars of chord 4, and so forth, I would probably play the odd lick. They don't have to be 2 bars of licks over the 5 chord. Incidentally, whenever you hear bop players playing double time lines, so that would be if you've got a blues that's sort of to be, so these are 8th notes, they're playing 16th notes. Often a lot of those lines, because now you've gone from having 8 notes per bar to 16, you've got more space to fill. So you've got to derive things from the 5. So a lot of that stuff is derived from the 5. Another thing you can do if you want to go one step further away, this is where we're getting into the concept of secondary dominant chords. So going to the dominant of a dominant. We can play a 2-5-1. So in the key of A, that's going to be going B, then we're going to go to E, and then we go back to A. When it comes to jazz harmony and jazz theory, essentially what you can do is with any chord, you can turn it into a dominant chord, and with any dominant chord, you can turn it into an altered chord, and then you can also substitute it for a thing called a tritone substitution. Tritone substitution is where you basically swap the bass note up or down a tritone, and the third and the seventh of the chord that you're currently playing will invert, so the third becomes the seventh and the seventh becomes the third. You see a B flat seventh chord, B flat, A flat, and then a D. If I put E in the bass, the seventh, the A flat is now a G sharp, which is the third, and the third of the B flat, which was the D, is now the seventh of the E, which gives you that strong resolution. So it means that a 2/5 could sound like this, or this. Both are great. But you could then play a line from a B7 chord, a line from an E7 chord, and then land back in A. For example, I'll go A, B, E, A. And that would sound pretty hip. You can, of course, keep extending that. You can do what's called turnarounds, where you'd go chord 1, chord 6, chord 2, chord 5, and that's the fundamental chord progression in a set of chord changes known as rhythm changes, which is a relatively tricky chord progression to play over. It comes from Gershwin's I Got Rhythm. And you can keep extending it. There's a chord progression that Charlie Parker used in blues is known as bird blues, where he just cycles through, going to the 4. So he gets like chord 1, then he goes to 7. So you can play through lots of different changes. But at this point, I would just worry about playing over the 5 chord. And then once you feel comfortable with that, maybe introduce going 2, 5, and then 1. And if you want to just go a little bit more, you can go 6, 2, 5, 1. And then I'll do a video looking at how you can approach altered dominant chords. I know it's something I found confusing initially when I was getting into it. What was an acceptable note? What can I alter? What's the difference between a flat 9 or a sharp 9? But it's not as crazy as you think. So if you got any questions, leave a comment, hit subscribe, and share this video with anyone you know who is finding this stuff kind of confusing. I'm just here to shed light on things that I found confusing and kind of reduced into a simpler way, at least for myself, so that I can play this music. Jazz is not that hard. It's just getting your head around some of these concepts can be tricky, and I think because it is a bit like a sort of quagmire at times, people sort of give up, go, it's too hard, I can't do it, which you can do it, you can 100% do it. It's not that hard. Use your ear, your ear will tell you, and just about having these concepts gone through clearly, like any kind of mathematical equation or theory, it can be explained slowly. But yeah, have fun with it, guys, and I'll see you for the next installment.